Dear friends, we gather today to mourn the coaching career of Scott Frost, a once proud man and a faux national champion, proud of puking in practice. He was loved by all in Cornhusker Nation. While today is a day of mourning, it is also a day to celebrate. So today, we celebrate his overall ineptitude and remind you all that we told you so. May Nick Saban have mercy on your soul. This is Drippin' Sports. That's right. We told you so. The Ice Time Nation, a nice combination of Iceman, Pub Time. This is Matty Ice. Welcome back to Drippin' Sports. Brad, how's it going, buddy?
It's going well. It was a rough weekend for me, obviously, being a Notre Dame fan. But more importantly, I like to identify as a college football fan. And anytime college football and or the NFL is taking place, I am a very happy person. And I appreciate your lovely and thoughtful eulogy, and may his career rest in peace.
I mean, I had to say some kind words, but I think at the end of the day, we all feel the same way that Cornhusker Nation feels. And, I just had to eulogize the guy. I mean, he went through a little bit of a rough patch there and after their big loss. But, I got to tell you, man, watching football for 2 days in a row, especially college and then NFL, it was really, really great to kind of get back to that. And I think we forget, and I don't know if your wife is into football or not, but like my wife and I forget what it's like to watch football for so long. And then when it's finally here, it's very, very exciting. And we built up this weekend, both college and NFL, to this place where I don't think it was ever going to meet those expectations. But I will tell you that just sitting down on Sunday and having NFL action all day was wonderful. And my son actually let us enjoy it without really getting in our way.
No, it was fantastic. My wife's not a huge sports fan, but she does entertain my enthusiasm and will give me the time to take in college football on Saturday, NFL on Sunday, especially if there's specific games like the Notre Dame game or something like that I'm interested in. And to have 2 days in a row, like you mentioned, of football, it kind of makes you, for me anyways, it makes me upset a little bit at how much I take that for granted come November, early December. Just, hey, I got football Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, where now I'm just craving it. Like, give it to me. I can't wait until opening weekend. I look forward to the Monday night games right now. I look forward to the Thursday night games. It's just fantastic.
Do you actually look forward to the Thursday night games? I honestly feel like the matchups that they give us are mostly dog shit.
I feel like they've done a better job in the last couple of years. I mean, we had Rams-Bills, right? Thursday. Now, granted, that was the opener, which is always usually pretty decent. But I don't know. I'll have to look up here in a second. I don't know who's coming up this Thursday, but I do feel like they've made an effort to improve the quality of the Thursday night game in the last couple of years because of complaints just like the one.
Now, I should cop to the fact that I actually didn't watch the Thursday night game because I was at a concert at Nats Park here. I got to see the Red Hot Chili Peppers' first concert in 3 years, and it was actually wonderful. And I was leaving the venue to your text about how bad the Rams looked. And I had a few texts basically that were talking about how the Rams looked and all that. And we are going to get to that. But first thing we're going to do is we're going to transition to week 2 of college football because we've been talking college football mostly the last few episodes. I mean, even for your first appearance on here. And I feel like now after 2 weeks, we have a little bit more of a sample size, although I don't think 2 weeks is really a sample size. But first I want to ask you, how'd you like our boy, or my boy, Pat McAfee, as a new personality, or I guess new permanent personality on game day?
Iceman, I love Pat McAfee. And it's not just because my NFL team is the Colts. I've listened to a lot of his podcasts. I love his personality. He seems very authentic and genuine to me. I love how his whole podcast is based off of him essentially bringing his boys from childhood along with him and doing it all together, and that's fantastic. The enthusiasm and perspective that he brings, and come on, the fact that the guy's a punter and the whole for the brand deal, it's just wonderful. And I think he's one of the hottest personalities in sports media right now.
Oh, there's no question about that. Like, there is nobody in sports right now who I think people want to be more than him. Even Lebitard, who's built this empire for himself and a huge following, talk about how he has had such a meteoric rise and he can do everything. And that's the crazy thing about him. And we talked about Lee Corso last week, and I think honestly, Lee Corso has kind of been that personality. I know he was a coach, but he was a coach a long, long time ago. And I think for the most part, he's known for his antics, helmet picking, the mascot stuff, all that. And I think actually Pat McAfee is a great person to replace him in terms of that kind of personality and fire and genuine nature. And I could see Lee Corso riding off into the sunset and Pat McAfee not just putting the mascot helmet on, but putting the whole damn thing on.
Oh, I could not agree more. I think that it brings some actual football knowledge from a player's perspective into the equation, which would kind of fill in for what Corso always sort of brought the coach's perspective. And then, yeah, someone who's willing to sort of partake in the antics. He's not above sort of embarrassing himself per se. And I think that, with him, it's not embarrassing. Everyone thinks it's fantastic. He's probably the only person on that set that could climb up on top of something and jump through a table, and everybody would think it was wonderful. I mean, if Kirk Herbstreit did that, everybody would probably be a little concerned.
Yes, I totally agree. And I want to transition to the games. Now, I did the cold open a little bit, and we talked about a certain personality, but I want to get to what I think is the story of the week in college football, and that is Texas A&M. Now, I want to take a little bit of a victory lap. In our episode where we talked about preseason rankings, I specifically used Texas A&M as my example of a team that always seems to be kind of lurking about, but never seems to make it in and never makes anything of themselves. And you did bring up the fact that they bought the best recruiting class that money could buy. And here they are getting upset by App State, who has done it again. And honestly, this should be the third big upset of a Power 5 school, not the second, because they really should have won last week too. But A&M just couldn't get it done at home against a team that clearly has a chip on their shoulder. And I do not know how in 2022 you are surprised by App State.
I don't know if surprise would be the word. Maybe impressed or unexpected, but I've never been high on A&M. I'm not a big Jimbo Fisher fan in general. And then just his personality since he's gotten A&M and in the way that he's gone about kind of trying to buy his way to the top of the SEC. I don't care how deep your pockets are. You're not going to be able to outcoach the likes of Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, etc. But you have to give all kinds of props in the world to App State. They're obviously for real. They took Carolina down to the wire, should have won that game. And you go to College Station, Kyle Field, one of the toughest places to play in the country, and knock off number 6 Texas A&M, who is on paper absolutely the more talented football team. That guy won't be at App State for long. The head coach, I'm sure.
No, he won't. Absolutely not. And when I say surprised, I'm talking about us being surprised. I'm talking about these coaches and these teams. Like, App State comes to town, you should 100%, the hairs on the back of your neck should be standing up because you should know that this is going to be a dogfight. And I don't understand. Well, actually, I do understand it. I will hot take here. I think that it's from a coaching perspective, A&M was not well coached and not ready for this game. And I think that 100% lays on the coach. And last week we talked about Nick Saban, and we'll get to Bama in a little bit here, but he knows how to coach his team so that stuff like this doesn't happen. And I just do not think Jimbo Fisher's the guy. And I think without Jameis Winston, he would be a nobody. He'd still be at Florida State.
I agree. I was just thinking that as you talked about, we may not be surprised, but these coaches are. And I think these coaches probably tried to tell their team all week long, hey, look, guys, dude, this team's for real. They've got some talent. They're well coached. But saying that and being able to engage 18 to 22-year-olds in a meaningful way where they believe you and they lock in and you can keep them focused on a game like this, that's where the real coaching talent lies. And like we mentioned that about Saban last week. Obviously, Jimbo Fisher does not possess that quality, and there's several other teams who are highly ranked that didn't possess that quality this week either.
Yeah, and never trust a guy named Jimbo. Speaking of coaches that are surprised, but maybe shouldn't be surprised, so I mentioned at the top, Scott Frost is no longer the head coach of the Nebraska Cornhuskers after losing to Georgia State. I can't imagine a more disastrous start to a season for a guy who was on the hot seat. Losing the first game the way that they did, not looking impressive in their first win, and then losing at home in a comeback. I mean, they Atlanta Falcons did basically. And Scott Frost is gone, and that program is just back to where it was in mediocrity. Now, they did make quote unquote news because it's the first black head coach, I think, in Nebraska history. And, that's all well and good. But at the same time, boy, we were right about that from the start. And anybody in Cornhusker Nation who wants to tell us otherwise needs to step up and let us know.
Well, anyone who would step up, they have no factual basis to defend their position with other than just their fanaticism, if we'll call it that. I don't know that anyone's surprised by this move. The only thing that surprises me about it is that it happened so soon. They were just a couple weeks away from saving themselves $7.5 million. The buyout was going to go down October 1st. They obviously couldn't wait. I don't know if they got a couple boosters to come in, or maybe a couple boosters just demanded, like, hey, I will give you the money. Get this guy out of here now. That's probably close to what happened. But I am a little sad, though, that he didn't get a chance to stick around and really screw their minds up by somehow sneaking by Oklahoma, because that's just the way it would have gone, I'm sure.
I mean, they actually have more of a chance of sneaking by Oklahoma now, I think, than they did with Scott Frost at the helm, which is funny because it really won't matter. But I think I want to talk about something, by the way. You just brought up something that I think is hilarious. You talk about boosters and getting that buyout money. Did you see the Ed Orgeron quote from last week after the game?
Something about once they gave him his money, he was like, hey, what door you want me to walk out of? I'll walk out of it as fast as you want.
$17 million buyout. And they basically told him they were going to buy him out and give him the whole thing. And his two questions were, when do you want me to leave and out of which door? And I think that is hysterically funny because, these buyouts are ridiculous. I mean, the thing about it is Scott Frost gets fired and sure, maybe his reputation takes a hit, but they handed him $7 million to be fired. Like, you and I get fired from our jobs, we get nothing.
15.
Oh, was it 15? I thought it was 7. I thought you just said 7. Oh my God.
Yeah, no, it was 15, but if they would have waited until October 1st, the buyout would have dropped to 7.5. That's what I'm saying. Like, so they could have saved themselves $7.5 million by waiting 2 weeks, and they chose not to, and they just said, we're just going to pay the 15 to get the hell out of here now. And that's what they did.
So they must feel that there was a benefit, or more of a benefit financially, for them to get rid of Scott Frost, pay the larger buyout, and maybe have a better season and get to a bowl game and get some of that money back at the end. Maybe they're looking at the writing on the wall saying they're not going to make a bowl game. We're not going to get that payout. Let's pay the 15 and we'll make up more than that 8 or 7 million later on.
I think your logic makes too much sense. Honestly, I think it's probably just hate money. Realistically, I think there's a good chance there's just boosters that have deep pockets that are like, we will pay it, just get him out of here now. Or they make threats like, if you don't fire him now, we're going to pull our support moving forward or something like that. But yeah, I think it's purely hate driven to some degree. And maybe hate's the wrong word for it, but it seems like the most convenient one right now. And can you imagine being so poor at your job that they were going to pay you $15 million to not do it anymore? I mean, I'd be in the Ed Orgeron camp, right? I'd be like, hey, what door? You just point me the right direction. I'm gone.
You are so right about that. I talk about this a lot with pro athletes when fans talk about, I can't believe he left for the money. And I was like, let me just be clear that if somebody hands you that contract, you could not sign on the dotted line faster. So if somebody said to me, look, you're terrible at your job, here's 15 mil, you're like, have a great day, fellas. I will see you never, and thank you for your service.
You're right. I do suck. See you later.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Speaking of sucking, my take last week about Alabama, or actually I was very adamant on social media this past week at Matty S. Freights at Drippin' Sports, are the handles that you can find my bullshit takes on. But I've been saying Bama by 30, especially after watching a guy on game day in Austin drink a beer out of a shoe. And the performance we got from Bama was anything but the dominant performance that honestly both of us thought. I wanted to get your initial thoughts on the game, and I have some thoughts on the game depending on what you witnessed, I guess, watching it, because I know that I think we watched it a little bit differently.
So I'll be honest. So Saturday was my son's second birthday. So early in the day, I had a hard time. Thank you. I had a hard time taking in as much of the games as I would have liked to, but kind of my takeaways are, I think that the familiarity played more of a factor than maybe Nick Saban counted on, or at least portrayed in the media. Texas is definitely talented, and I think that Steve Sarkisian's a very good football coach, and I think he knew how to put his kids in the right positions to at least maximize their potential against this Alabama team. But one of the most impressive things I thought was how late in the game, basically, and this is why he's probably going to be a Heisman candidate, if not win the Heisman. That Bryce Young basically says, "All right, fellas, I got this. Step aside. I'll take it from here," and leads them to the win.
The narrative of this game was the refs, honestly. And there were definitely some missed calls. I was watching it live a little bit, and the missed calls on some pass interferences, and I believe there was a missed hold on the 20-yard scamper for Bryce Young late in the game. But I want to say this about refs, and I don't know if you agree with this or not, but I generally don't get caught up in how many calls the refs miss, because I feel like over the course of a season, even within the course of a game, those things even out. They give you one that's not one that you're expecting to get, and a lot of it has something to do with where the penalties are missed or where the penalties are called, obviously, but that's what the refs get paid to do. Honestly, I almost tweeted the refs get paid to make sure Alabama wins, and they needed to win by 30 for me, but it didn't work out that way. But I thought that one thing was interesting. At the end of the game, the Alabama players were sort of celebrating, doing the hook 'em horns upside down thing, and Saban was pissed. So pissed. Like, he was running out to go shake Sark's hand, and he was like, "Stop doing that. Stop doing that right now." And I was like, maybe this Alabama team isn't quite as mature as some of the other teams that he's had.
Yeah, for sure. And I think part of that was he found out, now granted this was after the game, but he found out midweek that apparently that was going to be considered a penalty if it happened during the game. They kind of made a big deal out of that in the media a little bit, that the horns down was going to be a penalty. And probably that he just thought his team, even though they won, didn't have a lot to be proud of at that point based on how they played the game. In regards to the officials, I agree. The only calls we ever notice are the ones we think that are blown that helped, right? That, hey, you missed that call, and that's why that guy ran for 30 yards. There's probably a lot of calls that don't get made, that where we got to, hey, we got held on the left side of the line, but our right defensive end sacked him. You know what I mean? Like, I've been one, when I was younger in my coaching days, I was probably more vocal towards the officials just because I was ignorant and a moron. The older I got, I realized that it's just part of the game. There's going to be calls that are missed. And as a coach, you're in a much better position if you just treat those guys with respect, and you're an ally to them in a way, and just try to get your kids to focus on the game and play hard and not get involved in all the bullshit. But in terms of how things play out throughout a season and sort of average out, I think you're 100% correct.
I also think it comes down to execution too, because a missed call doesn't guarantee a win. I mean, there's very few calls in history of football or the history of sports where you can say that directly led to a victory. I can think of a couple off the top of my head, specifically one recently with the Saints and Rams with the pass interference call, and that was at the end of the game. You can tie the result directly to that, but for the most part, when these calls happen, I mean, Bryce Young made that scamper, but then they had to make some other plays too. The kick has to be good. There's so many things that have to go right in order for a drive like that to succeed. And even with a missed call or a perceived missed call, holding's tough because it happens on every single play, and some of them are going to get missed depending on the ref's vantage point. It's a human error. And I just think that it's so much more than just whether the call was made or right or wrong. It comes down to execution. You saw some of that in the NFL games too, that it didn't matter what the refs called. The outcome was going to be the same regardless.
Yeah, for sure. And as a coach, my message always was, kind of like to go to, maybe right there local to you, TC Williams from Remember the Titans days, leave no doubt, right? Like, you should not leave the game in the officials' hands. Like, if you are the better team, you should be winning by enough that a bad call isn't going to make the difference. Now, I understand that the margin for error, and especially the NFL, the margin for error is much, much smaller. The margin of error between two great college teams is much smaller, where one bad call could maybe shift the tide or the momentum of a game. But great teams make plays when it matters. And I don't think you can blame that on an official. Those guys do a really, really, really good job. I mean, I bet you their percentage of correct calls, if we looked at it, is through the roof. Kind of like Major League Baseball umpires, everyone bags on those guys, but they get it right a lot of the time. And they get paid a lot of money to be under that pressure.
And it's happening in real time. It's happening at full game speed. That's really hard sometimes. And even when you are the most trained ref, or you're Johnny on the spot or Jill on the spot these days, it sometimes doesn't matter. But you talked about, executing and the teams, leave no doubt. So the SEC is in an interesting place because obviously we have Bama, we have Georgia. We know those teams are good. At least I think we can say that Bama is good. Maybe they're not elite, but they're good. But we talked about Tennessee last week. We talked about Kentucky and Florida. And I think you can even throw Arkansas in there. Those are 4 SEC teams that were ranked coming into this week. And it seems like we kind of have a little bit more of a sample on some of them. And all of them came away with a win except for Florida. And Florida was kind of that hot team after knocking off Utah. And it goes back to that preseason rankings talk. How much do we know to have preseason rankings? Was Florida that bad? Or, excuse me, was Florida that good? And was Utah that bad? And now we kind of know a little bit more. But the SEC always comes out. And I thought the Tennessee Pitt game was really fantastic. Hendon Hooker had a great game. And I tweeted, man, I wish Hokie football had a guy like him.
I bet that all of Hokie Nation wishes that. I think that the tale of the Florida situation is that Utah must not be what we thought they were. And I don't think Kentucky warrants a number 9 ranking. I do think they're a top 25 team, but 9 seems a little high to me. And truthfully, 10 for Arkansas seems a little high to me. I think they're good teams. I almost think in this case, they're getting the nod just based off the SEC factor. That's kind of my perspective right now. But typically, I feel like sometimes it goes the opposite way, where maybe you have some SEC teams that are underranked, and then the kind of cream rises towards the end. In this case, I feel like these two teams might be slightly overranked.
The thing about it, though, is the SEC always evens out because all those teams have to play each other. It's a gauntlet depending on what, division that you're playing and all that. But I think at the end of the day, we're going to see most of those SEC teams in the top 25. But I 100% agree with you. Single digit rankings right now, I mean, it's hard to tell. And that's what I keep going back to the preseason rankings. And I don't have an idea for how to do it better. But a team like Kentucky obviously benefits because they started, at number 20? And now they're up to number 9. And Florida was unranked, and then they're 12th, and now they're back to 25 or something. And how do we really know? It's hard to really gauge. And one game I forgot about, by the way, was BYU and Baylor. And your boys came away with the win.
Yeah, I think that the BYU, I think they're up to 12 now. I think they're sort of the team to watch. They're a very, very good football team. And one thing, so Dick and Dayton from the Pub Time podcast, he took a vacation down to the Tampa area last week, and BYU was in town playing USF and staying at the same hotel he was at. And he talked about how most of these other college teams are made up of kids who are 18 to 22 years old. A lot of these guys are much older, because they go on their Mormon mission trips and things like that. These guys are in their mid-20s. He said half the team was there with their wives and their kids. And so just to think about that from just a maturity standpoint. Now, obviously, you have to have athleticism and all of that, but just a maturity standpoint alone, I think in the world of college football is really worth something. And we see it in the NCAA basketball tournament every year, where you have a team that is made up of 4-year seniors that have been together for a while, and they go deep into the tournament just because they've got that maturity and they've played together and all of that. So, but beyond that, they're a very talented football team. They're well coached, and they got a big game this week, which we can talk about more in a little bit if you want, or we can get into it now. But they go on the road to Oregon, and I think that maybe after this week, the narrative about BYU, although I don't think it's a negative narrative, I think but it will be more clear after this week to some people.
Yeah, the last team that I want to bring up is Air Force. We mentioned them last week. We're going to have Air Force watch all season long until they lose, and I think maybe we can add BYU to that conversation. But BYU, I think, has been on a national scale because they've had some good teams and some good players. But Air Force crushed Colorado, like absolutely crushed Colorado. Probably ran the ball 78 times for 600 yards or whatever it was. But I just want to point out that 2 teams are receiving votes now. App State is receiving votes. I believe they have 80 to get into the coaches poll, and actually Air Force has 19. So it would be fun to see some of these teams keep winning and get into the conversation. I'd love to see a ranked Air Force team. That would be fantastic.
Oh, it'd be great. It's those sorts of stories, Air Force, App State, are great for college football. The more fan bases you can get engaged into this thing, the better it is. And parity all day long, like we've talked about, is good for the sport. At the end of the day, the best team's going to win, and that's fine. But the more teams you can keep engaged longer, the more fan bases that are engaged longer, the better it is for college football. I think in Air Force, I expect them to go 3-0. They play Wyoming this week. Wyoming's not a terrible football team, but they got trounced by Illinois. Illinois is not very good. That's their only loss. I didn't take the time to look up the 2 teams they've beaten, but I think going into next week, I expect Air Force us to be talking about them still being undefeated next week for sure. But that's super exciting. And then two kind of, I think it's always good too, and USC's on the rise, but whenever we can keep sort of the west coast of the country in the picture, which hasn't always been the case recently since USC's kind of fallen off. Oregon's been a little, not down, but not in the top 5 or so. And back when we did our whole conference realignment thing, that's kind of the region of the country we struggled the most with, or almost it was an afterthought because there hasn't been a lot of good football being played out there lately. But you can't really say that right now. You got the Air Force Academy playing great. You got BYU on the rise. And hey, let's get excited about some West Coast football.
I will tell you a team that is not on the rise and is playing terrible football. And when we will move on to week 2, that is the Iowa Hawkeyes. I continue to be offended by Iowa Hawkeye football. 14 points in 2 games. And I asked a friend of yours, Ryan, from the Pub Tide podcast, if I can't remember what team it was, if they would score more points than Iowa did. I can't remember. It might have been the Bears. It was the Bears because I was talking with Ryan Leskis too. And I asked, will the Bears score more points than Iowa has scored in 2 weeks? 14 points. At least they finally got a touchdown, but just crap. Absolute crap. And I know you're going to tell me, yeah, well, they're going to have a 37-point game when they lose to Ohio State or whatever, but 14 points in 2 weeks is just abysmal.
No, that's pretty piss poor. I have no defense for that. I don't know how you explain it. The only defense for it is, well, hey, they're winning. Or no, excuse me, they lost. Never mind. They lost to Iowa State 10-7. But yeah, I guess that was the argument last week. But no, that's bad football. That's like 1980s Big Ten style football, 10-7, or was it 7-5 or 3 or whatever the hell it was last week. It's just at 7-3. It's just bad football.
7-3, and there were no touchdowns in the game.
Which is a shame because I really most times the last several years I really appreciate the Iowa brand of football and kind of what they're about and how they go about things. But this is just inexcusable.
Yeah, it's not great. And people paid tickets, paid money for these tickets, and they have just wasted their money. They might as well just hand it over to the boosters because it's not going to anything good at this point. But I'll tell you what, week 3 now, BYU has a huge game. They get Oregon. They travel to Outson Stadium, I believe, which is a really tough place to play. And Oregon, at home, I mean, they're kind of licking their wounds a little bit after that first week loss, and they want to look a little bit better, and this is their chance to get back into it. If Oregon's going to be in the playoff discussion, they have to win games like this before they even ever get to USC in their conference schedule. So what do you think about this game?
Well, I think it's almost an insult to the teams that will be in the playoff that you mentioned Oregon and playoff discussion in the same sentence this year. I do think that Oregon will get themselves together at some point, but right now is not that time. They're going to go through some growing pains. I think this is going to be a rough year, probably the roughest year they've had in a long time, truthfully. And my thoughts are that BYU is the much better team. And I'm almost positive, we'll talk about this game a little bit more later, but it'll make another appearance in this episode. But I feel very, very confident about BYU and their chances in this football game.
I do too. And I just think that being on the road could be a factor. Again, it's a tough place to play. The Oregon fans, they always come out and support. And I think that it will be a tough environment. But this is the kind of game that gets you ready for that playoff. This is the one the battle-tested game. You talked about that with Notre Dame, how you'd rather them have a tough schedule, be battle-tested, ready to go. And this is going to be another test. I mean, having Baylor come to your place is one thing. That's a tough game, and that's a really good football team too. But this is way different. And again, this is a team that is motivated in Oregon, and I say that because they were embarrassed on a national stage against the national champion. So, you got a team like BYU coming in, you could have a little bit of an edge. Now, the other game of the week, I would say, is between two programs who are constantly fraudulent, and that's University of Miami and Texas A&M. And it's a battle of the frauds here because I'm not really sure I buy into Miami just yet. They didn't look all that great against Southern Miss at home over the weekend. They beat Bethune-Cookman in week 1. I don't think we know a whole lot about them. A&M coming off this loss to App State, and I think they're hosting Miami here. They've got to be motivated. If Jimbo Fisher can't get his troops up for this game, then they have no chance this year.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting dynamics in this game. I'll say this much. Me personally, I'm not a Miami fan, but I am a Mario Cristobal fan. I am not a Texas A&M hater, but I am a Jimbo Fisher hater. So there's some weird emotions wrapped up in this game for me. Again, Kyle Field in College Station, Texas, one of the toughest places in the country to play. But Miami's no stranger to these environments. They play in tough environments all year. I think that Mario Cristobal, not a stranger to getting his teams ready to play in these environments. Last year his Oregon team went into the shoe and beat Ohio State week 1. So he knows how to prepare teams to go play in these places. I think, though, one thing that is dangerous about this for Miami is that this is a make or break game for A&M. Their backs are firmly against the wall. Miami could afford to lose this game because this is sort of a rebuilding year, an establishing year for Mario Cristobal. Where A&M, there's some high expectations there. And if they drop 2 in a row, 1 to App State and 2 to rebuilding Miami, the people are going to be out with pitchforks in the streets. It's going to be an ugly sight. And so to see how Texas A&M handles that will be very interesting.
I agree. And I think that, again, if a coach is worth a damn, then he gets his troops up for a game like this. I do like Cristobal as well. I think it's really cool for Cristobal of Cuban descent to go back to Miami, place where he played. And I think that he has been embraced there with open arms. I know that every single time they get a new coach, the U is back, the U is back. I think this is the time where maybe it feels the most real because Cristobal comes with real credentials, whereas the other guys, what is it, like Al Golden, Manny Diaz, none of these guys really came with credentials. They just happened to be, from a smaller school. Well, Cristobal is coming off of a really successful run with Oregon, and I think that it's probably the most promising season that they've had. But again, if they're going to be back in the national stage, they've got to win games like this, and A&M just happens to be coming off of a loss, and I think that is sort of dangerous for them.
Nope, absolutely. And, that's one thing is I was kind of going into this week thinking there were not very many great matchups, but the more I dug in, I'm like, there's not a ton of great matchups, but there's 3 or 4 of them that are very, very meaningful, that are going to kind of dictate the rest of the season and how these seasons are perceived. And this is definitely one of those games.
Well, you got a couple of ranked teams or newly ranked teams heading on the road. Michigan State heading to Washington. Again, Washington hasn't really been great, but traveling to the West Coast from an East Coast or Central Time, that time difference, playing that Pac-10 game at 11 o'clock at night Eastern Time. But, Washington is a tough place to play just because their fans are still pretty good, so you never know there. And then you got number 22, Penn State, traveling to Auburn. And again, traveling to an SEC school, as we said, these SEC schools are tough, and I don't know where Auburn is in terms of their talent pool, but it's always tough to play on the road at an SEC opponent.
Yeah, I took a really long, hard look at that game because I was like, man, it didn't seem like I kind of wanted to initially jump on Auburn, but then I kind of looked at how their last 2 games went. They played a couple of much lesser opponents, didn't win that decisively. They won, but they were a lot closer than you would imagine those types of games to be. I do think that Penn State's at least been in one for sure against Purdue, hotly contested game on the road. So I do feel like the edge goes to Penn State in that game. As far as Michigan State traveling to Washington, I think that Michigan State is a very, very well coached team. I think that what they have going there is a great thing, and I expect the Spartans to be ready to roll and focus when they head out to the West Coast, and to reiterate, when you can have a team ready to take on some of these environmental adversities, whether it be the time of game, the place you're playing, the level of opponent, all these different sort of distractions that have nothing to do with the actual playing of the game itself, if you're able to manage those, you're going to be really, really successful in this business. And I think that the staff in place at Michigan State seems like they're kind of made up of the stuff to do that.
I agree. So I don't mean to bring up a rough subject, but Notre Dame. And I think maybe, again, a little bit of an unfair ranking at the beginning of the season. Obviously, you get Ohio State. They played really well. They lose at home to Marshall. And I think that Marcus Freeman will be fine. But obviously, this isn't the start that you want. But a lot of people are throwing shade at Marcus Freeman about how he's the first guy to start 0-2 and all these other things. And it's like, come on, or 0-3, because I think he lost his last game, which may have been either a bowl game or was it the bowl game?
Yeah, it was the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma State last year.
Okay, yeah. And I was like, that's a little unfair. He took over a program after Brian Kelly left abruptly, which shocked everybody. So I don't see that as really on his resume. he's coaching a team that he was handed and Brian Kelly left. And this is really his first season. So give the guy a chance, man. The national media kind of sucks.
No, I agree. I think that I don't count. I mean, even if they won the Fiesta Bowl, like that game's sort of a wash to me. He'd been the head coach for a couple weeks. It was basically just maintain the status quo and then go from there. I don't put a lot of stock into that game. I know it counts on his record or whatever, but I don't put a lot of stock into that. As far as this week's game against Marshall, definitely disappointing. And one of the most frustrating things is, I kind of went back and watched it again. Some of the effort I wasn't really impressed by. And my concern might be that I think Freeman kind of has the reputation so far as a player's coach, which isn't a bad thing. That seems to be the way to go these days. But I wonder if he's got such a relationship with these guys that he has a hard time pushing them. And as a result, you get some complacency, some lack of effort in different situations. And people want to throw a lot of heat at offensive coordinator Tommy Rees. And don't get me wrong, I'm not very impressed with the job he's done to this point. But there's times where, like, there's nothing wrong with the play that's called. It's just that they're not executing it. The effort and execution is the biggest problem that they have right now. And that's coaching, right? That's communication and coaching. And there's been some speculation that maybe they're on both sides of the ball. Maybe they're trying to do too much. And I've experienced this as a coach at the high school level where you try to do so much that kids are thinking instead of playing. And you want to give kids scheme where they can play fast. You want them to play fast. And if they're thinking, they're not playing fast. And so I think that they might scale some things back a little bit, simplify a few things, cut the playbook down some on both sides of the football, and see if that helps. And then they just lost their quarterback for the year. He's out. Tyler Buckner, who was kind of a highly touted, sophomore coming into the season, had a lot of high expectations, out for the year. So I think that Marcus Freeman will be okay. I do think that he has an uphill battle and as far as like finding his way as a head coach, and he needs to do it pretty quickly just to keep the fan base from losing their minds. But he'll be fine. It's just going to take some time and some patience.
That is perfect to segue to the NFL. NFL Week 1 was here. Red Zone was here. And I said it on Twitter, and I will say it again here, that Scott Hansen at about 1:04 p.m. said some of the greatest words ever said in human history, 7 hours of commercial-free football. And it was just awesome to see it. I want to talk about a game that actually was not on Red Zone because you talked about Notre Dame. You talked about them not looking impressive and losing their quarterback. I think the story of the week by far coming out of the NFL Week 1 was the Cowboys and losing Dak to an injury all at the same time. Like, it could not have been a worse Week 1 for a team than what the Dallas Cowboys went through.
I don't have a ton to say about this game other than the fact that it seems like the Dallas Cowboys have become experts in mediocrity. I mean, just absolute experts in mediocrity. They're so good at it, it almost seems intentional.
I mean, when your coach is mediocre, your team is going to look mediocre. Mike McCarthy isn't that dissimilar from Jimbo Fisher, in my opinion.
No, and I mean, what he did in Green Bay was, I think, really more a product of the talent that he had. And not that Dallas doesn't have a talented roster to some degree. They got some guys. But I don't know what Jerry Jones sees in Mike McCarthy that you didn't have in, what's his face, Jason Garrett, I don't know what he sees in him he didn't have in Garrett, unless maybe McCarthy's just a yes man. That's one thing I think that Jerry Jones wants is a yes man, someone that's going to let him have a say, be involved in what's going on. And the last time that the Cowboys were really successful, where they were winning championships, was with a coach who probably wasn't a yes man, right? I don't think Jimmy Johnson gave in to Jerry Jones very often, right? But if you're winning, you don't have to.
No, but I will say this. I have some theories. So my in-laws are all Cowboys fans. They have been for a very long time. My father-in-law was stationed in Texas. They lived there, and they kind of got caught up in Cowboys hysteria, and they have been with them ride or die, rain or shine. And I have a lot of chats with my brother-in-law about this, and my stance on the Dallas Cowboys has been very firm and will not change. They are not going to get out of their own way until Jerry Jones steps aside as the general manager of the club. He's the owner of the club. He pays all the bills, totally fine. I mean, as the owner, he does have the prerogative to be the general manager and decide how he's going to spend his own money. But it's a paradigm that is not shared by any other team, and there's been 30 years of no winning here. So at some point, when you have switched out quarterbacks, you've switched out coaches, you've done everything you can to make it the primary, I guess, the ideal situation to win. And the only thing that has stayed consistent is Jerry Jones as the GM. So how does he look in the mirror and say to himself, I don't like the players that we have, when he's the one that is picking the players? I think until that changes, nothing is going to change in Dallas. Injuries you can't do anything about. Unfortunate for Dak. I really like Dak and I want him to succeed. But I think in terms of the personnel, the coaching, everything, it all falls on Jerry Jones.
He seems like the type of person that gets caught up in the shiny things, right? He wants the flashy stuff. T.O., Des Bryant, that sort of thing. I think he gets caught up too much in that sort of thing, as opposed to what actually goes into winning football games. And I do think, again, kind of to reiterate what I said before, he wants a coach that's a yes man that he can control. And the worst part about it is, I guess, if you got the money that Jerry has, then yeah, you could be the owner, the GM, and you can control the coach like a puppet, but you're not going to win a Super Bowl that way. It's just not going to happen.
Totally agree. So I have an overall question for you on week 2 before we get into some of these games. What do you feel like you learned watching the games on Sunday? I guess Monday.
When it comes to the NFL, especially going into a new season, as much as we have these preconceived notions in our minds about what teams are good and aren't good, throw it out the window. These guys are all professionals. And yeah, you get your blowouts here and there. You have your maybe one team a year that's just totally terrible, and maybe one dominant team. But even if that terrible team plays the dominant team, it's just a few plays away from being a win for the terrible team. Like, the margin for error in the NFL is so small. It has the parity that I wish that college football had. And to see that, it's so exciting. It makes it a much better product that I love watching. And so just my overall takeaway is that as soon as we think we know, we realize we don't know and have no idea. Vegas has to make bajillions of dollars off of people betting on the NFL, because nobody freaking knows what's going to happen week to week.
I agree. I actually think that we don't know anything until about halfway through the season, because there's a bunch of teams hanging around at 6-6, which is more than halfway through the season. Like the Raiders every year are like 6-6, and we think that they're somewhat in it, and they're not, right? There's teams like that, everybody in the AFC South. But I think that one of the things we learned this week is that not a lot of these teams were ready. It almost seems like all the teams were sloppy. A lot of sloppy play, not a lot of crispness. Only a couple teams really stood out to me as being really crisp, and that was the Chiefs and the Chargers. Other than that, though, I think that a lot of teams have a lot of growing to do, and I feel like we don't really know anything, and you're getting so many overreactions about just about everything. I mean, I think that there are some teams that we know are going to be bad, but I agree with you, and you made a great point. I say this a lot every single season. The difference between the best team in the league and the worst team in the league is marginal at best. And a lot of times the difference between 10-6 and 6-10, or what used to be the records, it's like a bounce here, a bounce there, call here, call there. It's not really that different, and they are all professionals, and so it's so tough. And just because teams won or lost this week doesn't mean that their seasons are on the rise or over. And that's what I learned this week.
And it's so much different than the other pro sports, because in basketball, you get the tanking factor that comes in. And in baseball, you get late in the year. I mean, some of these bad teams in baseball, they're playing AA, AAA rosters, basically. I mean, so the talent disparity is significant, where in the NFL, you don't get that. You get the best, basically, that franchise has to offer week after week after week after week against the best that the other franchise has to offer. And that's why it's the number one sports brand in probably the world, honestly. And you talked about looking crisp or some teams looking sloppy. Well, I really thought that the defenses looked pretty solid. I was I thought a lot of the offenses looked really sluggish. I was very surprised at how often a lot of drops, things like that, and how often that they had to settle for field goals, for sure. Like this week, it seemed astronomical how often they couldn't punch it in once they got in the red zone, and they'd make some mistakes, get backed up. I saw field goals turn into punts because of sacks or penalties. It was very sloppy football, especially on the offensive side.
And I should have been more clear. That's really what I meant, because It's like in baseball when guys come back from spring training, the pitchers always have the advantage until the hitters can actually get used to the game speed, used to pitching, right? The hand-eye coordination, all that timing stuff. And that to me is the same in the NFL. That offensively, just because the team looked bad in week one, remember the Packers got blown out by the Saints last year. They only scored 3 points, ended up winning 13 games. So you don't necessarily know anything in week one. But I'm going to give you a list of some of the teams that kind of surprised me a little bit. So first of all, I thought that San Francisco looked really terrible. Trey Lance looked really, really bad. But I'm not willing to bury the guy yet. I do have some friends who are like, yank the guy, get Jimmy G in there. But you drafted this guy for better or for worse where you drafted him. And I think that you need to give him a little bit more time than just one game. The field conditions in Chicago were terrible. The rain, everything was bad. It was set up to be a terrible game offensively and also for a guy who is really an untested rookie.
Yeah, I think that you have to some degree, just sort of put that game behind you and move on. The conditions were not that of a normal game, and I get that those games happen, but how often does a team play in those conditions? Maybe once a year, twice tops. And sure, you're in the NFC, you may have to go play a game in Green Bay in a foot of snow in January. That might happen, but I think that Trey Lance is going to be fine. The 49ers offense is going to be fine. The 49ers are going to be fine. The Bears won a very Bears-like game. I don't think anyone expected them to win, but I tell you what, I took them. I took them +6. Once I realized what the weather was, I'm like, they might lose, but it's going to be an ugly, close football game, and that's what it was. But I don't think it's an indictment on the 49ers or Trey Lance at all.
No, I don't either. And the Bears don't win that game without Justin Fields, by the way. Like, he's so very clearly the best thing that they have, and the rest of what they have is absolutely crap.
You mean the only thing they have? Not the best, the only, the absolute only.
That's what I mean. Like, I'm just saying, like, he wins that game for them, making plays that nobody else on the field can make on his team. The other game I want to talk about is Pittsburgh and Cincinnati. So this is one of those games, and I talked about overreactions. Everybody's talking about this is an early candidate for game of the year because of how it ended and all that. The reason that game was so exciting because both teams were just inept in so many different ways. And Joe Burrow, forgetting that he is a Super Bowl contender and he acted like Daniel Jones out there, just giving the ball away. 5 turnovers or something like that, a fumble and 4 picks. And yet still, they almost won the game. Now, something that happened controversially in the game, I think it was Jamar Chase was not given a touchdown that very clearly he scored. They didn't challenge the play, and then the play calling after that was terrible, and they ended up not scoring there. And a lot of people were saying the refs missed it. Well, they could have challenged it, and they didn't, and that's on the coach.
It's a fucking travesty that they did not challenge that call. I have no idea how they did not challenge that call at all. I mean, I watched it one time, and I'm like, I think he's in, man. Like, he's in. And the fact that I don't know if they thought the booth would challenge it, if they didn't realize where the clock was, if they didn't think it was still outside of 2 minutes or what, or if they're like, oh, fuck it, we're not going to waste time. We want to keep our tempo and we're going to score anyways. Well, that didn't happen. And I like had that feeling too. I'm like, damn it. They just believe they're going to find a way to get in anyways. And we don't want to get off our rhythm here. And no, they fucking squandered it away. And then to add to it, to kind of let me circle back for a minute to what you mentioned. Joe Burrow, for one half of football, a half and half of a quarter, yeah, he was a different person. But then once he got his head out of his ass, because I have him on, not that anybody gives a shit about anybody else's fantasy team, but I have him on my fantasy teams, and he was negative 4 or 5 points like at halftime, and still ended up with damn near 20. I'm like, son of a bitch, what happens if he doesn't turn the ball over 5 times? You know what I mean? Like, but that just shows you how good he can be when he's locked in. And yeah, he can't make mistakes like that, but he's still a young guy. He's gonna figure it out. But holy crap, how about the missed fucking field goals?
Oh yeah, and this is actually a great point because I sincerely wonder to myself, you got guys making the kind of money that they're making, and actually this is perfect for Monday Night Football last night. You got a guy on your roster in Russell Wilson, and it doesn't have to be them, but just in general. And you leaving it up to your kicker. And I get that kicking is part of the game, but to me, this is a fundamental flaw in football that so many times at the end of a game, the result is in the hands of not the best player on the team. It's a kicker who comes in a few times a game to make a couple of kicks, And it just seems ass backwards when you're paying so much money for these guys on the field, especially your quarterback. Let the quarterback win or lose the game.
I agree, but isn't it also kind of fun that like there's a guy that has mostly no impact on the rest of the game, and then he's the one that can come in and like decide it for you? And I mean, and really, I think the leading scorers for the year are usually a kicker.
Well, they are, because they kick all the. Yeah, I mean, of course they are.
Extra points and everything. But can you imagine that pressure though too? That that's what's on your shoulders, and they're probably really severely underpaid for the pressure that's put on their shoulders. But no, I get it though. Like what they do has no place really in the rest of the game at all, and what gets it to that point, and then that you roll them out there to win it or lose it for you.
I don't know. Like last night's game. Now, I think you talked earlier about the play call being correct in the execution, and I call that process versus result. And I'm a big process over result guy because I think it's very easy to look at the result and say, see, they should have done something different. And sometimes it just doesn't go your way. But last night in the game, you got Russell Wilson, you traded for the guy, and you just paid him like $250 million guaranteed or whatever it was, or in his contract. And you're going to kick a 64-yard field goal. I just do not understand any of that. I do not understand what they're doing there.
That's another perfect example, though, of how terrible just the kicking game was and how it impacted these games. And you're right. It's definitely something to think about how much these guys have an impact on the outcome of these games. You said you're paying Russell Wilson millions of dollars, and you got some guy that's probably making several hundred thousands coming out kicking a 64-yard field goal. Russell Wilson could probably throw it farther than that guy's kicking it.
The other thing, too, is like the Steelers game. My wife and I were watching it, and she made the Ace Ventura reference where the lace is in. And I said, no, it was just a terrible kick. Like, it was such a bad kick. And that's just egregious, especially that close, right? To win the game. It's one thing to miss a 64-yard field goal with all the other factors that go into it. I mean, the percentages are not in your favor, but you are paid to make kicks, and that's really your only job. And at the end of the game, in overtime, you can't make kicks, then you cannot be on this team. Like, that's the thing that frustrates the hell out of me, is it's like, all right, if we're going to have this be a part of the game, you only have one job, and you should be doing it fairly well. That kick was nowhere near accurate.
Was it the Steelers or the Bengals that had their backup long snapper? Do you remember? I thought, for some reason, I want to say it was the Bengals.
It might have been the Bengals, and that's funny because I want my son to be a long snapper and play 20 years in the league, making the league minimum. It'd be great career.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that was the deal, right? It was kind of a high snap, got down late off the mark, and it was way wide left or something. But I tell you what, a little fun fact: I used to one of my little specialties back in the day it's just because I was one of the two people on the team that could do it, but I did a little long snapping in my day. Now, I wish it's kind of one of those things you wish you would have stuck with it a little bit, because you could make a nice living being a long snapper and have a really good time.
Oh, I got a plan, man. Trust me. I've got a list of niche sports that my son is going to learn, and we're just going to keep going down the list and see which one he can get a scholarship for. Rowing, fencing, you name it. We're just going to try and figure it out. Just as ridiculously obscure as you can find. But long snapper would be the dream, because 20 years, baby. That would be a great, if you're good, but that'd be a great career.
Yeah, and that's the best part about it is, like, they can't touch you when you're snapping.
No.
And
nope.
I mean, and really, yeah, sure, you're one of the first guys downfield, because you can release kind of early, but you're usually not going to be in on making that play, not at the NFL level. And I'm sure they don't want you to do anything crazy to get yourself hurt, because we saw this week how hard it is to find a good backup long snapper. So they're probably like, snap the ball and get the hell out of the way.
You can't waste a 53-man spot on a backup long snapper. Like, you just got to hope that this guy doesn't get hurt. But switching to a game in which a field goal was made, probably the most disappointing result of the week was the Browns edging out Baker and the Panthers on a last-second field goal. I was so mad at this because I thought Baker had it. I thought he had the comeback, man, and was absolutely squashed. And he's getting killed. He's getting killed by the media because he didn't have a perfect game. And he led that team back, and their defense let them down.
And let's be honest, man, Baker's never been perfect. You get what you get with Baker. He's going to compete. He's a great competitor. He's going to make some plays for you, but he is not Peyton Manning. He's not Tom Brady. He's not that guy. But I think you can win with him. I think he's almost like he's kind of like an asshole Doug Flutie. It's kind of what he reminds me of a little bit.
He kind of reminds me of like Rex Grossman, a guy that is going to come in, could give you that 3 touchdown game, but could also give you that 3 pick game. And Baker is kind of like that. I mean, when Baker's on, he's very on. And when he had the talent around him and they had the scheme around him in Cleveland, it did work. And he was hurt all of last year. And that non-throwing shoulder, people are saying, "Oh, it's not his throwing shoulder." And I'm like, have you ever thrown a football that many times? Like your non-throwing shoulder is 100% part of the deal. And when you're in pain, as you pointed out, you're not playing fast, you're thinking. You're thinking about how much pain you're in and all that. And I wanted the win so badly for him because my wife asked me, "Is there something about Baker that I shouldn't root for him?" And I was like, "I don't think so."
No, and to be honest, I usually don't like people like Baker Mayfield. They're kind of arrogant and that it's usually not my thing. But there's something about that guy that I can't help but root for. I just love his enthusiasm and I want to see him be successful. I would have loved to see him be successful in Cleveland. I'd love to see Cleveland be successful. They just can't get out of their own friggin' way. But uh, once he got down there to Carolina, I'm like, all right, here we go. He got a shot. And I was like you, man. I'm on that emotional roller coaster the whole game, thinking that, all right, here we go. He's going to get it. And the second we think, all right, he's got it, like you said, the defense shits the bed. I think there was even a couple of missed field goals in that game before they finally sealed the deal. But he'll be okay. The Panthers will be okay. I think Matt Rule's a good coach. They'll be fine. This, Cleveland, I think this emotionally was probably meant more to Cleveland than it to Baker or to Carolina. I think it meant a lot to Baker, but you probably got the best effort out of Cleveland you're going to get all year in that game.
Yeah. And speaking of the antithesis of Baker Mayfield, Mac Jones, boy, the Patriots did not look great in their first showcase this year. But I will say this, it wasn't like the Dolphins ran him out of the building. The defense played really well for the Pats. They just turned the ball over twice. You got a fumble 6. And again, we talked about this with Virginia Tech and Old Dominion. You're not going to win the game when you're giving up touchdowns to the defense. It's just not going to happen. And I think that they are in trouble this year, but I'm not down on them the way that everybody else is. And I don't think they're going to be like bottom 5 bad, but I think that they have a lot of things to sort out offensively and certainly that offensive line.
Yeah, I think they're going to compete. Bill Belichick's too good of a coach for them to not compete. I think you'll see them hang around that 500 mark, and they may even threaten for a wild card spot later in the year if they can bring some things together. I do think that it was an impressive win for Miami and the rookie head coach. I thought that Tua looked pretty solid, which he probably needed to for people to keep faith in him. But I think they changed up their road trip plan to go down there a week ahead of time and kind of get acclimated to the weather. Obviously, that didn't have really an impact on how things went for them. I do think I was surprised at how poorly they executed on both sides of the ball, especially offense, for being a Bill Belichick coach team. They just seem kind of unprepared.
Well, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that they have 2 failed coaches as their offensive gurus right now. And it's the most turnover I think that Bill has had. And when you got a second-year quarterback and you got a lack of depth and talent on the team, and I guess I shouldn't say that they're not talented, but the guys that they have are kind of journeymen. You got Devontae Parker, Nelson Aguilar, right? These are not guys that are just wowing you on the stat sheet. And the Dolphins did look solid, I think, but the Patriots defense kept them in that game 100%. And that's why I say it wasn't as if they got run out of the building. I mean, they only really gave up like 9 points or 10 points or whatever it was, because again, one of the touchdowns was actually off of a turnover. So the defense didn't really give it up, but yeah, I don't know. I think that if Bill Belichick wasn't coaching this team, I would be a little bit more worried. But when you got the experience that he has, and they're going to figure it out. A team that, or 2 teams that just could not figure it out, man. And I feel like I'm not dumping on you here because we already had to talk about Notre Dame, but Jesus Christ, the Colts and Texans, what was that?
That was rough to watch, and thank God for the Red Zone channel that I only have to watch bits and pieces of it. But I don't know what it is with the Colts in week 1, but I don't think Frank Reich has won a single game in week 1 since he's been there. They've had some, and a lot of them have been ugly like this one. Jonathan Taylor did not look as advertised. I do think, Matt Ryan's going to be good enough for them to be competitive as long as they can figure out some of the other things. The Texans, I think, are maybe a little better than people thought they would be. Lovie Smith's no slouch as a head coach. They played good defense, but it was a really ugly game. Like they said, I saw I don't know if it was a meme or what, but that the AFC South didn't win a single game and two of their teams played each other.
This is the exact game when I talk about the AFC South and how I just can't with that division. This is exactly it. But here's the funny part. So if I told you that Matt Ryan threw for over 300 yards, Jonathan Taylor ran for over 160, and Pittman had over 120 yards receiving, and they only scored 20 points, you'd be like, what is happening here? Because that's exactly what happened in this game. And by the way, today the Colts cut Rodrigo Blankenship. He's gone. So kickers are just flying everywhere. Yes, he's gone.
Seriously? Oh my God. I was surprised like when I saw him out there, because I thought last year he had a rough year last year, and I'm like kind of down the stretch. I'm like, oh man, they might. And I liked him, and I'm like, they might cut him loose because he's been pretty inconsistent, and but to see them let him go after one game, wow. And I know he missed. It was a game winner, right? He missed the game winner or something for it to. And then a tie. It's like, holy shit. That's the one thing though, man. Like we talked about kickers, maybe it's not their place to decide games, but you know what, man, their career can be based off of one kick. And so I guess that's the trade-off. That's sad, but that whole game in general just plays into what we talked about earlier, just the sloppiness of offenses specifically.
Totally agree. So looking at week 2, we got a couple of intriguing matchups. Thursday night, you asked about that. Chargers and Chiefs. Early AFC Championship preview, in my view, because I think that both these teams look good, and I think they have the ability to make deep runs in the playoffs, especially if Brandon Staley is going to get his act together as a coach. I thought last year he hamstrung them a little bit by being a little too cute with his fourth down calls, and I am somebody who generally likes going for it on fourth down in most situations because I think you want to, again, let your offense do what they're supposed to do. Both of these teams look really good, but maybe people are a little bit oversold on the Chiefs as being better without Tyreek Hill, but certainly they didn't skip a beat against the Cardinals. So I like this matchup a lot, and I might actually watch on Thursday.
Well, it's a great matchup, and there's no denying that. I do think that the Chargers will sort of anoint themselves as the team to beat in that division. I really think Jake Herbert's a stud, and it would not surprise me. And, I'm predicting it. Chargers are going to go into Kansas City, Arrowhead Stadium, and they're going to win that football game. I would not surprise me one bit, and I will just go ahead and take that pick right now.
Is that your pick of the week? Because you had Jake Herbert as their quarterback, so I'm not sure how much we should be trusting
Justin Herbert,
here.
Sorry. My bad. Good call.
Yes, for everybody who is putting money on Brad's picks, Jake Herbert is not going to win you anything, so please be careful whenever you do that.
Justin Herbert and the Los Angeles Chargers. No, I think they're really good, and I really do believe that they're going to win this football game, and I think they're the favorites in that division. I know that's not what the pundits are picking. You can't not pick the Chiefs, but it would not surprise me one bit if the Chargers win the AFC West.
Not true. On my other podcast that I do every month with my brother-in-law, I picked the Chargers to win this division, so I'm hot out in front of these pundits, damn it. And by the way, isn't it funny when you change one thing about somebody's name? Jake Herbert sounds like the guy who does your groceries at Walmart or something like that. It doesn't sound like an NFL quarterback.
Is there a Jake Herbert somewhere?
I don't know, but if he is.
In some sport? I feel like it's a name. I guess not. Justin Herbert, maybe it's his brother, his alter ego. I don't know.
It's probably the Iowa quarterback who can't get the ball in the end zone. Anyhow, so the Dolphins traveling to Baltimore come in kind of close to my neck of the woods to play the Ravens. And the Ravens are the talk of the town these days because Lamar is betting on himself. I think it's a huge risk because I think in football you're more likely to get hurt, especially at the quarterback position, playing the way that he does. But I think that he's a really good player, and I think we're going to find out a little bit about Tua. I mean, it's tough to play on the road in the NFL, but that's a really tough place to play against a pretty quality opponent.
Yeah, I think the Miami fairy tale, whatever exists, the honeymoon phase that may hang over from week one will come to an end. The Baltimore Ravens are a very good football team. They're extremely well coached, and Lamar Jackson's one of the most dynamic players in the game. It's much different than trying to game plan for Mac Jones, right? And and to go on the road and in that environment, like you said, I'm not sure what the spread is, but I have full confidence in the Ravens to win that football game.
I do too. And I think this is just part of the growing pains. But again, if we want to see growth from Tua and this team, because we've said that he has no excuses this year, it's probably the last year that they're going to put all of their eggs in that basket. He's got to win games like this. And so far in his career, he hasn't. But Buffalo has had his number, but we'll see what happens there. Also, looking at the schedule. So the other game that intrigues me is the Bucks traveling to the Saints. Now, the Saints, they aren't the team that they used to be, and traveling to the Superdome or whatever it's called now, the Caesars Bowl, whatever. It's still a tough environment, but it used to be tough because the team was also tough when you had Drew Brees at quarterback. And the Bucks haven't really played all that well against the Saints, except I believe they beat them in the playoffs on their romp to the Super Bowl. But this is going to be a little bit of an interesting test for them. Jameis at quarterback, they won last week. How much faith do you really have in them? I think we're going to find out a little bit more about the Saints than we are about the Bucks, because I think the Bucks showed, even with their red zone problems, that I think they're still very talented. And I was a little bit wrong about Tommy. Seems like he's pretty locked in.
Yeah, I'm not a believer in Jameis Winston now. Not from a I would like to see him be successful, because I do think that out of some of the quarterbacks over the last 10 or 15 years we've seen come out and maybe not have the success that they had in college, they sort of would just kind of fade off into oblivion. I do think that Jameis has kind of tried to reinvent himself a little bit and really looked inside to see, okay, what can I do to improve? I think he's serious about trying to be a great starting quarterback in this league, and so I'm rooting for him from that perspective. But I don't buy in that he's gonna have great success. I wish he would. And the Packers, not the Packers, the Bucks, Tom Brady coming to New Orleans. They may have had their number in the past, but I think that Tom and the Bucks get it done this week.
A game that would have been intriguing had it not been for Dak's injury, the Bengals traveling to Dallas. That would have been interesting this week, but with Cooper Rush at quarterback, it is not interesting in the least. I think the Bengals should win that game, but we were kind of robbed of what could have been a very fun offensive game there if Dak Prescott had been playing this week.
Except for when the most NFL thing happens and the Cowboys beat the Bengals, right? Because that's what the NFL is about.
That is what the NFL is about. So looking also, Bears-Packers, the oldest rivalry in the NFL, I think we know that the Packers are going to be a little bit better off than the way that they looked, and I don't think that the Bears are any good, but I see the Packers kind of getting their mojo back a little bit because really the Vikings embarrassed them.
Yeah, there's one guy I don't want to play when he's angry, and that's Aaron Rodgers. He's extremely talented. His biggest deficiency is I don't think he works well with others, or specifically with rookies. I think he really, really struggles with rookies that he feels like don't respect the game or don't take it as seriously as they should, and so on. And hey, good for him in some degree to try to like raise their level, but it's got to be hell to work with a guy like that. I do think they'll get it figured out. I do think they're going to win this game, just because of the bitterness factor that probably exists from what happened to them last week. The Bears, I agree, on a field that's not got 4 inches of water on it, they're not gonna to sort of level the playing field per se. I think they're in trouble. I don't think they have the defense to defend an Aaron Rodgers offense, and unfortunately, I don't think they have the playmakers on offense outside of Justin Fields to score enough points to beat an Aaron Rodgers offense.
Yeah, and Green Bay's defense is pretty good. So the offensive line problems that the Bears have, I mean, you even saw that in the game against San Francisco. And even though they won, there was a lot of struggles there. So I see them getting to the quarterback and Fields being under duress. It won't be like that Browns game last year where he had an average of like half a second to react per play. But I think that you're right. I think the Packers will win. Now, their division rivals, the Minnesota Vikings, travel to Philadelphia. Now, Philadelphia is one of those teams. Actually, both of these teams coming into the season are kind of those teams where we feel like we think that they're good. We think they're good enough now, at least for Philly, to win the division, but we're not quite sure we're sold on Jalen Hurts and Kirk Cousins. But I think their offensive-minded coach now in Minnesota is so much better than Mike Zimmer. And I see this being a close game, but this is the kind of game Minnesota has to win if they want to take that leap up, especially having beat the Packers last week.
When can we put to bed the debate of if Kirk Cousins is for real? Like, I feel like he is not like jump off the TV screen dynamic, but I feel like he has proven himself to be an above average, a good NFL starting quarterback. And you're right. I mean, I'm not picking on you here. Like the national media, everybody always like, well, is this the year Kirk Cousins asserts himself? Is this? I mean, the guy's been starting the NFL now for what, 10 years or something? I mean, how can a guy start in the NFL for 10 years and not be good? I think he is just fine. And now that, I think the Vikings are for real. I think that they are going to win the NFC North. I think they're going to win this football game. I don't think the Eagles are bad, but I don't think that they are what people thought they were per se. I am not completely sold on Jalen Hurts, and give me the Vikings.
I like the Vikings as well. And I think that you're right about Kirk Cousins. I see him as a top 15 quarterback in the league because if you're going to rank quarterbacks, you got to start 1 through 32 starters. And I do think that he would start in a lot of teams over a lot of these other guys. Like, would the Colts like to have Kirk Cousins right now? 100%.
Yes.
100%.
Yes.
So there's a lot of teams in the league who aren't starting over who would love to have this guy. And I think that you're right. I think now, though, having a coach that is a little bit more akin to what they need to do. I mean, Mike Zimmer is a good coach, but not for that football team. Last year, so many times they didn't give the ball to Justin Jefferson, and it's so very obvious that he is the best offensive playmaker that they have. Just give him the damn ball, as Keyshawn used to say. And it worked this week. He had a monster game.
No, I agree. And like, it's funny. I was sitting here trying to think about it as you said, how many other teams would take Kirk Cousins? And I just start rattling them off, and I'm like, well, just think about the division. I think the Bears would probably take him. I think the Lions would take him. The Packers might be the only division team that would say emphatically no. And if you stay in the region, like the Colts would take him. The Browns would take him. The Bengals would probably stick with their guy. I mean, but it's just, I think you would be over 50% of the teams in the league would take Kirk Cousins.
And hold on, just looking at the list here. New Orleans.
Yes.
The Giants.
Yes.
The Steelers.
Yes.
All of them would take
Yes.
Kirk Cousins. The Seahawks.
Yes.
The Colts. All of the Commanders. All of them would take Kirk Cousins. Well, the Commanders had him, but they would take him right now. Houston would even take him. I mean, especially since they have an unproven young guy.
Yeah, who the fuck is Davis Mills?
The third. So that means there's been 2 others before him. And he's got the longest neck in the league as long as Mike Glennon's not lurking about there. So I didn't mean to cut you off there, but just looking at half the league would take Kirk Cousins. Half
No,
the
you're
league would
right.
take him. I mean, I think
100%.
if the Patriots could have moved on from Tom Brady to Kirk Cousins, I think they would have taken that and not have to draft a guy like Mac Jones. I mean,
I think, yeah, if you gave Bill Belichick the choice, you want Mac Jones or Kirk Cousins the rest of the year, he'd take Kirk Cousins.
right. And so I think Kirk Cousins does get a bad rap. That is the Monday Night Football game. Now, one game I forgot to talk about was Bills-Rams from last week, and that is actually a perfect segue to my stat of the week, the Iceman stat of the week. Now, Buffalo is hosting Tennessee, and Tennessee just got embarrassed by the Giants, but I think Buffalo is for real. And I want to read a stat speaking off of Buffalo being for real. So I have a couple of them because last week we introduced your pick of the week. And so I, in earnest, need to give a couple of stats to kind of catch myself up a little bit. So first stat of the week is related to Sean McVay, and I teased this to you offline. Coming into last week's game, he had coached 81 games for the Rams, had never been under 500. Sean McVay, for the first time in his Rams coaching career, is under 500. I thought that was amazing. That's pretty spectacular for 81 games to never even start 1-0 or be 1-2.
Sean McVay strikes me as the type of guy that probably knows that stat and probably fucking hates it. He's probably so angry right now. I bet he hasn't even eaten a meal this week. He's so mad. He's just punishing himself.
All right, so second one, coming into this week, and I don't know if it's true now, but coming into this week, since 2020, in the red zone, Tom Brady had 58 touchdowns, 0 interceptions in the red zone. That is just a ridiculous stat.
That's extremely impressive. I mean, especially, you got to think, that's a guy that's played over the last 20 years. more football game. If there's anyone else in the league still that's played 20 years, he's played more football games than any of them because of all the Super Bowls and playoffs and all that shit he's been in. And the fact that that's the stat is nuts. It's almost like, hey, like if you had someone that had, if someone got blown off to space in 1950 or let's say 1970, wherever, and comes back and you're like, hey, I'm going to tell you about the greatest quarterback in the history of the game. And you gave them that stat. That's all they need to know. Right? I mean, just to understand how great that guy is. So impressive.
And even the nuances of the fact that it's since he joined the Bucks and it's been in his mid 40s. Like Tom Brady's career has been 3 separate arcs and they've all been Hall of Fame worthy. And it's just the craziest thing. But the red zone. So this is the official stat of the week. And I cannot tell you how hard and loud I laughed when I read this on Twitter. It's amazing. Texas A&M is tied for the national lead in red zone scoring percentage at 100%. They're also last in the nation in actual red zone attempts at 1.
That is pathetic. That's so pathetic. But it makes me so happy that Jimbo Fisher owns that stat. Are those stats collectively?
Yeah, that is stats collectively. But that last one, I mean, it's unbelievable. They have the national league. It should be the national lead at 100% in red zone scoring, and they've only had 1 attempt. So 1 for 1, but that is sad. In 2 games, they've been in the red zone 1 time.
No, it's absolutely pathetic. But again, like I said, I'm not even upset about it. I think it's fantastic. I don't know of anyone who deserves it more.
Well, I know that you already gave your pick of the week, but let's show the graphic here for Coach's pick of the week. Unfortunately, started the season 0-1. I had Lions over the Eagles last week. Man Campbell's squad almost got it done. Unfortunately, they couldn't get it done. And I believe your official pick this week was Chargers over Chiefs on Thursday night, so we will add that to the docket. I don't think that that's too bad of a pick. I think in week 1, you took a little bit of a flyer on the Lions. And by the way, the Lions have the pillow fight of the week. They are hosting the Commanders, so that will be an absolutely abysmal football game. But hopefully, Coach, you can get to 1-1 and get back to 500, and we will watch that as the weekend prevails. So, got any parting thoughts this week, my man?
I'm just excited, man. I'm so pumped that football's back. I can't even tell you, even bad football, because we watched some bad football this weekend, both on Saturday and Sunday and Monday for that matter, because the Cowboys are playing. But we've watched some really abysmal football, but I'll take bad football over no football any day of the week. It's an absolute pleasure. I just have a special place in my heart for football and sports in general. I just love just this time of year, all the competing that's happening. It's fantastic, and being able to get on here with you and talk about it just makes it even better. So no, man, looking forward to another awesome week of football and being able to get back on next weekend and recap everything. And hopefully we can get that record to 1-1 and build from there.
Well, I hope so. So obviously, condolences to Scott Frost's coaching career. We had said that at the top of the show. It was a really great show this week, really great week. A couple things. First of all, support the Pub Time podcast. Now, they are live every Tuesday, and you should check them out. There are tons of debauchery to be had there. So check out Ryan, Dick, and Brad, of course, on Pub Time Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. I think you guys are on YouTube and a bunch of social media handles. And, of course, MattySmedia.com for all the other podcasts that I do and support and all that stuff. And with football here, there's a lot of content to be had, I would say, on both shows. But Pub Time, unfortunately, doesn't do a whole lot of sports talk, which is why you're here. So I really enjoy this stuff, and I hope that the audience enjoys it as well. And Brad, from me to you to the audience, what did I call it? Ice Time Nation. That's what it is. That's what we're coining the phrase. It's a amalgam of Matty Ice and Pub Time. The Ice Time Nation. Hope everybody has a great rest of your week. Enjoy the football this week. And Coach, I'll see you next week.
See ya.
The opinions and viewpoints expressed on Drippin' Sports with Matty Ice and Brad are those of Matt, Brad, and their guests, and not necessarily those of the Matty Ice Media Network. Drippin' Sports with Matty Ice and Brad is exclusively owned by Matt and Brad and is brought to you by the Matty Ice Media Network.